Welcome to Podium Time today. We are so excited to be joined by Ruth Hartt. Ruth, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks
Yes,
for
thank
having
you.
me, guys. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Could you give us a quick overview of who you are and what you do?
Sure. For the first 17 years of my career, I was an opera singer and a music educator. And then I made a huge pivot into the world of business theory and research, which I know I didn't plan. I didn't plan to end up working at a think tank, but it has been a fascinating pivot for me. I joined the Christensen Institute about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was founded by a Harvard Business School professor and world-renowned business thinker. And so was I became immersed in these business theories. And the more I learned about them, the more I realized that they were so powerful and so relevant for really everything in life. Because at the Institute, we actually take these business theories and we apply them to problems in the social sectors. So we're trying to fix like healthcare and education and poverty.
Mhm.
And I started to think to myself, okay, we've got this problem back in my old world of the arts, which is declining audiences, and if these business theories can help companies grow and bring in customers, well, maybe this is going to help in the arts world too. And so that prompted this huge passion project of mine, and it sort of brings us together today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this season is our theme is building back audiences, and we're talking about all the things around that. So, what does that phrase mean to you? How does your work relate to it?
Well, when I first started looking into this idea of, how can business theory help us grow our audiences, I started to dig into what does that decline really look like? And so the National Endowment for the Arts tells us that between 1997 and 2017, we saw a 50% decline in live classical music audiences. And, our core audiences are aging and they're not being replaced by a younger or more diverse audience at a pace that's going to allow us to really continue in a healthy way. And, these numbers are confirmed by the League of American Orchestras. There's like a 2.8% decline each year in orchestral audiences. And all of this was before COVID.
Yeah.
So COVID comes along, and then we have this thing called the Great Acceleration, which is something that Scott Galloway, who's another business professor, has brought forward. And he says, any trend that was happening to your sector before COVID has now been accelerated by 10 years. So all of a sudden, we're looking at these numbers dropping even faster than we anticipated before. And, Aubrey Burgow has sort of looked out and calculated, what this great acceleration probably means is that we may lose another 50% of our audiences if we don't put a plan in place to start to combat this trend.
Mhm.
So it really is, for me, it's like, okay, status quo is no longer working. What are we going to do to turn this around? And I really see it. It is, obviously it's a difficult time for arts organizations and especially classical music organizations, but I actually do see it as a huge moment of opportunity. We have to pivot to survive. And that's really exciting because from this perspective of business theory, if we can pivot from this reverential centering of our art to more of a centering of the customer, we're going to see growth. It's been proven out in other sectors, right? And I think what we've dealt with in the past is, as classical music insiders, we actually have such a huge disadvantage because our loyal audiences, the people who know and love classical music, are shrinking. And as insiders, it's really almost impossible to understand how to reach and attract the outsiders, I like to call them, the
Mhm.
uninitiated. But that's something I think if we can start to step into their shoes, the shoes of the outsiders, and start to see the world through their eyes, that is how we're going to start to rebuild our audiences.
Mhm. Reverential is a great word. I was reading through your blog, through some of the older posts, and I kept seeing like egocentric, and we can return to this later, but we don't realize how focused on ourselves we are until somebody points it out.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's, myself, I was an opera singer. I've been studying music since I was a child, right? And so I've been immersed in that world, and I totally get, we have worked so hard at our art and we feel so strongly about it, about its value. But I always like to talk about, when you think about things that you yourself are an outsider to, like I was talking with a group recently. I said, what are some things in the world that you look at and you think, who would ever want to be involved in that or pay for that product or service, and that kind of disdain or confusion or disbelief, that's what most music outsiders feel about classical music. They have no context for our world, and their eyes are going to glaze over when they hear any sort of jargon. They don't care about, these glowing biographies of our conductors, and our artists. And they're even kind of disdainful just because this whole world is totally unfamiliar for them. And from a distance, it seems classist, it seems snobbish, and it seems really boring. So we have to see our world through those eyes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you've been doing a lot, and you've been talking to a lot of people about the art of gathering. So we definitely want to talk about that, and I think you will know where best to start with it. So I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah, The Art of Gathering is a book by Priya Parker. I think it came out in 2018, and I don't remember who recommended the book to me, but as soon as I started reading it, I was just struck by the fact that every single word was relevant to the classical music sector. It just sort of hit me in the face. So the book is it's a guide for making any type of gathering more human-centered and more meaningful and more rewarding for everyone involved. And the way that she helps you do that is she helps you clarify your purpose as an organization, and also helps you rethink your traditions through the lens of that purpose. And one of the great quotes in this book is, when we don't examine the deeper assumptions behind why we gather, we forgo the possibility of creating something memorable and even transformative. And I mean, every classical music organization wants to have impact and wants to create something that's memorable and transformative. And I think from Priya Parker's perspective, one of the most important things that we can do as a classical music organization, as you're working to throw off the status quo that is no longer working, is to take some time to really think about and maybe even rethink what your purpose is as an organization. And something that people don't often do, because we think, oh, our purpose is music. I mean, what a noble purpose, right?
Our purpose is to play Mozart 40.
Yes, exactly. To create beautiful art and to share this amazing gift with our world. But we're facing this great acceleration. And I think to successfully reverse that trend, you have to start rethinking your purpose from the perspective of these outsiders who don't value your art as much as you would hope that they would. I think it's a really critical step. And if you're not doing this, you're doing your target audiences and your artists a disservice, and you're kind of wasting valuable resources. So it's really all about, every gathering is a social contract, and what are you doing to hold up your end of the bargain? So this huge call to action in this book is, rethinking your purpose.
Mm-hmm. So for orchestras putting on a concert, or like if my quartet's going to put on a recital, if our best purpose is not to just perform great music, what are some options that we can redefine that into?
Yeah. So Priya talks about how we so often conflate category with purpose, right? So the category of the thing that we're doing is we're making music, but that doesn't answer the question why. There's that deeper why that we have to answer.
Yeah. And
I believe as a classical music organization, it's all about figuring out what is the why for our community? What is the need and the deeper why for our outsiders? So Priya says, you got to shift from the what to the why. So keep asking why until you uncover a belief or a value, or think about what you want to be different because you gathered, and then work back from that goal. Mm-hmm. And the third thing she says is look for the need in your community. So what are the needs that your community shares that you are best positioned to solve? And that for me just made so much sense. And it aligns so perfectly with the business theory that I have learned at the Christensen Institute. And that's this concept of the customer job to be done. And I think that's something I think we are going to delve into a little bit here on the podcast. So should we do that now? Should we go into the weeds a little bit on business theory?
Yeah. So tell us about jobs to be done.
So jobs to be done theory is all about what motivates someone to make a purchase. And, for for so many decades, it's been all about sort of mining through customer data and looking at age and ethnicity and income level and family size and shoe size and trying to figure out from all of this data how a customer will behave and, how to influence their behavior through marketing and whatnot. But what Clayton Christensen and others have discovered is that this does not provide enough context for us to actually create the right offerings or to create the right marketing to draw people in. Mm-hmm. So what they have discovered is that what is behind customer motivation is not who they are. So they say, a customer does not make a purchase because of who they are. So all of that data mining isn't going to get you very far. It doesn't provide all the context. We make purchases because of who we want to become. So in other words, we are constantly dealing with issues in our lives or desires or problems that we're trying to solve. And we are pulling in products or service to help us make progress on those particular needs that we have in our lives. And understanding that context is what really helps us target those customers.
Could you share the drill bit example real quick?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a really good way for people to understand this concept.
Definitely. Yeah. So Ted Levitt, another Harvard Business School professor, has this famous quote that people always bring up. It's, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole. So it's that sort of outcome that you're thinking of. But when you keep asking why, which is what we do in Jobs to be Done theory, you go even deeper. So you say, okay, you ask the customer, well, why do you need a hole? And they might say, well, I need to hang a shelf. And so you ask why again, why do you need to hang a shelf? Well, I want to display some family photos. Well, why do you want to display family photos? Well, all of my children have left the nest and I really miss them. And I want to relive those happy memories because I don't see them very often. Oh, okay. All of a sudden, I've got so much context for the emotional circumstances in your life, the social circumstances in your life. And with that context, suddenly I can create products that serve you better. And I can create marketing that's going to draw you in, right? Maybe you don't need a hole or a drill. Maybe you just need those strips where you can, stick something to the wall and not damage the wall, right? So it provides so much fodder for, marketing, but also product innovation.
Yeah, and what I really love about that is it pulls back and back and back to present a problem, and we are one of many solutions. So how can we be the best solution for the people that need us at that time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you think about why people buy a ticket to a classical music concert, it's just one solution in their lives. Maybe for like 1% of our audiences, they're buying a ticket because they want to hear beautiful classical music or because they know the conductor and just want to see him in person, right? These are our like fanatic loyalists. But for a lot of other people, they might be solving a different problem. There might be an adult daughter who is tired of buying a bouquet of flowers for her, elderly mother and wants to give her something unique, like a shared experience that they can, go and create a memory around. Or like a millennial who is new to town and, wants to meet other people, but really hates like the bar scene, So there's all these needs that can be solved by, an orchestral concert ticket.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about what we do, we always talk about, we're playing this piece and we've got this soloist and isn't this great? And that doesn't address any of those needs. That only addresses the 1% of people who might happen to know what we're talking about.
Exactly. And I think for a lot of these outsiders, it ends up being a turnoff because they don't care about Beethoven. Sorry, but they don't. And I'm saying this as an insider. I love opera and orchestral music, but these outsiders who are not familiar with this world, that's not going to work to draw them in, to be frank.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If we could change direction for just a second, this is really, really applicable to, like you said, to designing our product, to designing our concerts and our gatherings, and to helping market them. This may go nowhere, but I think this is also a great way to redefine how we think about and how we talk about what we do. A lot of our listeners are going to be conductors talking to the audience, or musicians talking, again, to the audience. How does that change how we actually talk to people at the concerts when we're there?
Yeah. Well, I guess I will go back first to Priya Parker because she has a section on how to host. Yeah, and in her as she's writing, she's probably thinking of, parties and business meetings and other things, but this is directly applicable to classical music concerts. And I think what happens traditionally at a classical music concert, we have all these implicit rules about how to behave, first of all, and then also just this idea that everyone already knows classical music. And so we don't need to kind of help them understand how to engage with it, right? Or help them understand, how to listen to it, how to show up to a concert.
just sit down and listen to the concert. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think what she says, she says, stop being a chill host. Because, we think, okay, we don't want to impose on, our guests or our patrons. But if in the end, what happens is we leave them to their own devices. And so they might end up feeling confused or left out or stupid because they don't understand what's going on. They don't know when to clap, etc. There's so many of these, anxieties that they might have because they don't know the world well. So I think it really comes down to making sure that there is someone there that does step into the role of host, whether it's the conductor or the executive director, that really makes a point of welcoming outsiders and explaining what the rules are going to be around audience etiquette and giving a little bit of, help around how to engage with the music, giving them some ideas on how to engage with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were talking to a conductor recently, I think, who was saying that she actually guides the audience non-verbally during a concert of how they should be experiencing. Could you touch on that really quick? I can't quite remember who it was or what it was.
Yeah, that was Emily Isaacson of Classical Uprising, which is a group actually here in Maine, in Portland, Maine. Yeah, she was laughing. She says, I am not a chill person at all. So, she loved this idea of not being a chill host. But she says, I think she was saying, she'll take a swig of beer. If they do a lot of real informal, maybe outdoor or, concerts in places you wouldn't normally think of a classical concert being. So sometimes there is beer being served and whatnot. So she shows them you don't have to be uptight, you don't have to be a certain way at all. So she'll, turn around and interact with the audience. She'll dance with the kids. She'll, if there's a soloist playing something incredible, she'll really, turn and watch the soloist and really show wow, look at this amazing virtuosity, and just help the audience understand what they're actually hearing and seeing. And I love it. I think that, when, you can tell an audience how to behave, but when you can actually model it for them, that's what's going to make them even more comfortable to kind of relax and say, okay, I guess, all bets are off and I don't have to worry about behaving a certain way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And all of that goes back to jobs to be done and goes back to rethinking the purpose. Is if it's not just to perform this music excellently, we're good at that. We don't have that problem, but thinking about what the audience is actually getting from this besides just sitting quietly and listening to the concert.
Yeah, I love what you said about we're already doing that. We're already making good art. That is not the question here at all. And I certainly am not saying that we need to change our product in terms of what we're performing. Although I do think there is something to creating these sort of relevant doorways in when you're programming something familiar, like the annual Star Wars concert or whatnot. That does create this sort of relevant, familiar door for the outsiders to come in. But like I said, we are already creating an amazing, incredible product.
Well, and that's a time when marketing and talking about the concert can be about the music on the concert because they're already familiar with it. And they know if I go to see Star Wars music, I know I'm going to feel excited. and I know I'm going to love it, and I know I'm going to remember my childhood when I went to see it in theaters. Not that I went to see the early Star Wars in theaters, but when we do a classical concert, when we do one of our standard concerts, then they don't have that context when they hear about the concert.
Yes.
And then saying, "Oh, we're going to play a piece by Rimsky-Korsakov," doesn't mean anything to them.
Crickets.
Yeah. And
yeah,
it does
and that's
to
where.
us. But
Sorry, go ahead.
we know what that means, but again, we're the insiders, and it's the outsiders that we have to build back and get coming to our concerts and get comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I think in our marketing, we have to think about what are the needs that our customers are experiencing in their real lives, in their everyday lives, and how can we tie what we're doing into those needs. And that's, I think, that really plays into marketing.
Yeah, one of the examples that I've really liked recently is marketing to, millennials is who are every orchestra's trying to figure out how to get millennials into the concert hall. And one of the big benefits that we have as how our concerts already are is that it does kind of force you to disconnect and sit and not be connected to your phone most of the time. And so marketing to millennials as this is a space to like get away from the constant connectivity of the world is so opposite from come hear us play whatever.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge draw. I mean, the digital detox, I think, is like that Google search has gone up exponentially in the past few years because people are so sick of that 24/7 connection. And I think that's a great draw for these millennials.
And that's of course just one of many possible examples. But if we start with what the audience needs, then we can see how to market it, how to convince them that we're a good place to be. Yeah. Even if they don't have any relationship with us already.
It's almost like you got to do that reverse engineering.
I think,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look at the outcome that they're seeking and then sort of like try to work backwards from that. Yeah. And in a real, jobs to be done project, what you would do is you would sit down with like 50 customers and have like an hour-long conversation with them and really suss out like all of these different components of, of their context, the functional needs, the emotional needs, the social needs. And then you would probably also sit down with people who have never attended and find out why, like, what is it that turns you off? But for a lot of classical music organizations, you don't have the time or the money to do that kind of research. And so if you just look at consumer trends, research organizations like Accenture and GWI and things like that, they're doing studies all the time talking to real consumers about what matters most to them. And especially around COVID, I mean, people are prioritizing health now more than ever, self-care. They're trading escapism for mindfulness. That right there, makes me think, okay, less Netflix, more like, meditative music. That's something we can help with, right? And so many people are just dealing with, anxiety and worry and disconnect. And I think all of those things are things that we can be a solution for as classical music organizations. So it's just digging into those trends and figuring out which one of those we want to target.
And I wonder how this applies not just to the marketing and the experience, but the actual music that we're programming and performing and being intentional with how that affects what change we can get in the audience by the music that we program. What do you think about that?
I mean, absolutely. I think, because if you find a way to market to people, like this particular piece of music is meditative and soothing and calming, and it's going to be great for your anxiety. I mean, that there are a lot of people in the world today that are looking for something like that. And, social, even just the idea of like being in a room with other people experiencing something together is something that we were missing, during the pandemic. But yeah, I think there's a lot to just the emotional needs and even the health benefits too. You just sort of highlighting those on occasion in your marketing, I think can be a good thing too.
Is there anything else about, again, the art of gathering stuff better than we do. Is there anything else you want to touch or any paths we did not follow or any paths you want to follow more?
There is one section when she talks about etiquette, and I think
Yes, please.
I was very drawn to that as well. So, the history of, in particular, like let's say the opera house, back in, the 1700s, early 1800s, the public opera house was financed by the monarch or the noble or a wealthy merchant, and people of all classes attended these things. And I mean, you read the descriptions and it's hilarious. People were talking over, they had to create, special arias for like the sorbet course because the clinking of the sorbet spoons was too loud. And, it was a very social event. And then along came like the music halls where they provided, more diverse entertainment from music to magic. And it was a more relaxed atmosphere, and lower income groups tended to migrate towards those. And so the upper classes, decided we're going to distance ourselves from those, really crude, noisy, lower class folks. And we're going to behave differently. We're going to be silent, in the opera house. We're going to focus directly on the stage and not at each other anymore. And we're going to center the art rather than the customer. And so I love this because, Priya talks about the fact that rituals like these emerge to solve a specific challenge. And when these rituals and traditions of a way of being or behaving, when they align with the purpose and the needs of the group, they can be really powerful. They can promote a sense of belonging. They can create efficiency. They can minimize risk. But when they're solving for an outdated purpose in a world that has changed dramatically, they can actually become a handicap. And of course, our world is very, very different than it was in the 19th century, in terms of diversity and the digital revolution and COVID and climate change and all of that. So you got to start to think, okay, this kind of etiquette we've sort of passed down from the 19th century, does it really work for today's world? And Priya even goes as far to say that an etiquette approach is imperious and the opposite of humble, and it shows no interest in how different cultures or different people do things. And it holds up this standard of behavior as the only acceptable one for people who want to be seen as refined. And so I think in essence, she's saying, certain implicit rules of etiquette actually promote inequality and discourage diversity because they don't welcome people who don't know them. The people who are not familiar with that world don't feel welcome. And really the numbers, the numbers show this to be true. I think the number is 48% of US adults don't feel comfortable in the classical music world. That's a number that comes from Colleen Dillon Schneider. So are we really going to keep going with all of these implicit rules that so many of US adults don't know or don't feel comfortable with? I think it's a really interesting question.
Mm-hmm. So what can we do to counter that, to fix that?
So I think it's in this book, Priya talks about setting up more explicit rules, and she actually calls them pop-up rules. A lot of people are doing this for other gatherings where they'll say, in a wedding invitation, it'll say, don't bring your kids, or, you show up and you have to put your phone in a basket or something like that. So for a classical music organization, it's thinking about, okay, what are the traditions we absolutely cannot let go of that we really want to have as part of our organization? And what are the traditions we actually can let go of? And what new ones can we put in place that we then share explicitly with our audiences so that they know what to expect and how to behave? And I think it helps outsiders feel more comfortable, but it also encourages insiders to experience our art in a new way. And so I think it ends up sort of equalizing these insiders and outsiders so that all of them feel comfortable and safe and encouraged to maybe take some risks that they wouldn't have taken in the past.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it makes me think of, just a few minutes ago, we were talking about how, you could market to a certain group of individuals that the concert hall is a place to come to disconnect. Mm-hmm. Whereas, as you just described, the digital revolution, everything has happened. And you have some organizations and people trying to figure out how to incorporate that connection into the concert hall so that, maybe you're less disconnected in the concert hall. And it's less of a, that mysterious space of like, should I be clapping now? I should be quiet, blah, blah, and encourage that whole like, no, get your phone out, take pictures, And so there's just that contrast of like, two very different needs.
Yeah.
People having very different types of needs that you have to figure out how to work around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's either figure out how to make that work in one concert. And I've seen some organizations, they actually set up a certain zone in the concert hall that is phone welcoming. Phones are encouraged. And if you sit there, you can break out that phone and, take video or take pictures. And I actually think it's a great marketing opportunity, actually. Like if you get people tweeting out that they're at this concert and all their followers are going to see that, that's not a bad thing, right? Or you could also advertise certain concerts as being phone friendly and more interactive, and you get to bring in your drinks and, chat. And I know there's some other organizations that are doing, choosing different venues that make that actually more, easier to do, where you have the space to move around and maybe you're standing rather than sitting and you have refreshments and things like that. So yeah, it just depends on whether you want to sort of combine those two in one event or separate them out. There's also, a lot of companies now, or a lot of classical music organizations bringing mindfulness and yoga in too. I've seen that as well. So lots of areas for innovation.
Yeah. After reading your post about the pop-up rules, I wrote a note and I sent it to our executive director. Like, we have a pretty clear cell phone policy. Our policy is we don't want cell phones during the concert, but we've been kind of dawdling around like a clapping policy. And so I sent her like a priority one, like, it doesn't matter what we decide, we have to decide something and then tell the audience.
Yes.
Because we did a concert and we got a couple people in our surveys who we reached an audience from a different city that's a little bit more conservative than our main audience. And we got a bunch of responses from the surveys of like, oh, the people at this concert were clapping when they shouldn't have been and all this stuff.
Yes.
And it was like a Beethoven kind of more get most people in, doing Beethoven 7, like reaching non-classical audiences. And that plus what you were talking about with the pop-up concerts, I was like, we need to pick something and we need to make it explicit, because we can't keep expecting people to know when not to clap and then letting the audience get mad at them. We don't really care either way, but we have to be the leaders. We have to be the radical leaders in this situation, make a decision and set the
Well,
rule.
and that's that idea of psychological safety. Like, if you're an outsider and you clap at the wrong time and 10 people turn and glare at you, are you going to come back?
No.
Probably not. So yeah, you have to, and that's another thing that Emily Isaacson tells her audiences is there is no shushing allowed. If someone next to you wants to holler because they're getting into it, that's allowed. Welcome all responses.
Yeah, it gives the clapping individual that safety and that confidence to clap, and then it gives the people who don't like clapping, like, they know that they're in a space where that's okay now, and now they don't get to sit there and even be mad at other people that they're clapping.
Yeah, I love it.
Can we talk real quickly about, can you contrast what we do now, which is really ego-centric, and what we should be doing, which is customer-centric?
Yes.
Maybe marketing, concerts, whatever this touches on.
Yeah. This is one of the main things that I first noticed when I started delving into this idea of, business theory and how it applies to the arts, especially classical music. I started to look at, well, how are we trying to bring in customers? And even that word customer, I think, can make people uncomfortable when it comes to classical music, but that's what they are. How are we trying to reach them? And I started to look around and I hadn't noticed before, even though I was an insider, and well, actually probably because I was an insider, how much we are so focused on us. You go to, I actually looked at, I think it was like 180 websites all over the world for classical music organizations, because I wanted to see like what's the sort of trend on website marketing. And
so they're very bad.
Well, I mean, they're not bad, they're not terrible, but what's happening is You go to most of these, let's say orchestra websites, and splashed across that homepage is a giant photo of the conductor. And sorry, but if I'm an outsider and there's this like old white guy up there waving his arms around, like who is he and why should I care is going to be my response. And even a photo of the orchestra, same thing. Like that still doesn't give me a sense of if I'm going to fit in, if I'm going to feel comfortable, what the atmosphere is like, what it feels like to actually be a part of a concert. So that's where I started using the word egocentric. I think, this traditional arts marketing is really focused on the art and the artist. And the language that I typically see is very elevated, very descriptive, very insider friendly, lots of jargon. And it talks about the organization, lots of the use of the word we and us and our. And it focuses on the needs of the organization, the priorities of the organization. And marketing is almost exclusively focused on selling a ticket. You go to someone's Twitter page and you're seeing buy tickets now. Tickets are already available now, or they're trying to score a donation. And you see that also in like buttons and headers and calls to action. So you contrast that with marketing you're seeing out in the I'll call it the real world, like the for-profit world where most of us live most of the time. And you start to realize how much it ignores the real person, the real life customer. It doesn't talk to them, doesn't show them, it doesn't focus on their needs at all. And so I think there's this huge opportunity to shift marketing, shift the lens away from the organization and the art and shift it towards the customer. So when you start to do that, your marketing content begins to focus on, it shows pictures of the audience. It shows pictures of who is there and who fit, it answers that question, am I going to fit in? It hopefully answers the question, what does it feel like to experience this concert? Which is actually a really hard thing to show, believe it or not. It also recognizes that not every person is ready to buy a ticket. So you have to instead, rather than saying, buy a ticket now, you have to actually create buy-in. You have to build buy-in and show why someone might want to buy a ticket, show the benefits or the transformation they can expect from engaging with your product or your art. I could go on and on. The language that you use, the language doesn't need to be elevated and descriptive and reverential. It needs to be down to earth. It needs to be outsider friendly. You need to avoid words that are not familiar to outsiders. There's Bob Mesta, who is this Jobs to be Done guru. He says, if you speak in the language that your customer speaks in, it's going to be so much easier to sell something. And even just, if you can just make a commitment to start using the word you and your, it's incredible how that completely changes your marketing. It just totally makes a shift from, we and us and our, and it just prompts a lot of innovation when it comes to marketing. So,
well, I think if you're referring to yourself as we, yada, yada, it comes across as almost not exclusionary, but the moment you start saying it's yours, you're giving a little bit of ownership to them.
Yeah.
So that they feel that call to action to take care of it, to participate, because all of a sudden this isn't their orchestra, it's mine too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can also be condescending too. So yeah, getting rid of the condescension and increasing that feeling of ownership, I think, is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these all seem like they are just marketing things sometimes, but these affect so much more. I mean, like we talked about earlier, they kind of reframe. Well, they don't just kind of reframe; they reframe the purpose of why we're gathering, which is for people to change, for people to fulfill whatever desires or whatever needs they have that could be fulfilled by other things. But we're saying, well, you can get that here also.
Absolutely.
What is one of your favorite examples of audience-centric marketing? Just a really clear example for people to go out and look at.
Yeah, this one I found when I did that I sat down and looked at like 180 websites. I came across Opera Australia, and I think I scared my husband because I sort of yelling, this is it. So Opera Australia, this was early 2022, I believe, when I came across this. So it might not be the same anymore. But their website does not mention the word opera, does not mention the word music or classical. And what it does instead is it highlights a real job to be done for consumers. So the top of their website is emblazoned with the words escape ordinary. And there's a photo of, a woman dressed in a really extraordinary gown, walking towards the Sydney Opera House. And what's so fantastic about this is this kind of marketing, it doesn't cater to the people who are already familiar and who already love classical music. It caters to the people who have this desire to escape ordinary. And guess what? That's a lot more people in your community than the people who know and love classical music. And that's the benefit of this idea of marketing the job to be done or marketing the customer need, because it opens up your market so dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah, the people who do know classical music, then we can put Scheherazade. They'll know what that means.
Yeah, right.
Well, again, it's just like, why are we taking so much time, effort, money, resources to just turn around and preach to the choir? Because the people who are going to buy that ticket, regardless, they don't need the marketing. They don't need the time. They don't need the effort. So, you might feel like, well, we have to make sure that they don't feel left out. They aren't going to feel left out because they're going to be there in the seat regardless.
Yes. And California Symphony has, Aubrey Bergauer did this great turnaround with that group, and they changed up a lot of the etiquette. They said, clap whenever you want. Cell phones are welcome. Wear your jeans. Bring your drinks to your seats. And there was this worry that their loyal audiences would get upset and, wouldn't like this sort of change. But in the end, everyone was so energized and excited by the fact that there were these more diverse, larger, younger audiences coming in, even the artists on stage. And so in the end, it was like, yes, what else can we change so that we have this more youthful, more vibrant energy and life in our organization?
Ruth, is there something you've changed your mind about recently?
I like this question. So one of the other books that I am absolutely obsessed with and highly recommend is The Art of Relevance by Nina Simon. And everyone always says, oh, Nina Simone. No. Nina Simon. She's the one I think that sort of turned me on to this insider-outsider language. She writes to the museum world, but it's so applicable to the classical music. And one of the things that she says is the greatest gift that insiders can give outsiders is to say, I want you here, not on my terms, but on yours. And I'm excited to think there might be something of value in this room. Let me help you access it. So love that quote. So something I changed my mind about recently, years ago, I was a high school chorus director for a number of years. And I did occasionally program a musical theater piece or a pop piece, but, I had them wear tuxedos and long black dresses, and we did a lot of classical music. And I think if I was, for some strange reason, to go back to that world again, I think I would approach it in a very different way. And I would be so much more focused on relevance. This idea of creating these relevant, familiar pathways into a world and welcoming someone into my world on their terms rather than my terms. So changing up what they were wearing, maybe a tux and a long black dress is not as relevant and familiar for a high school student as it was for me as like a recent, a conservatory graduate. And just programming more of a balance of contemporary music. And all of those things, I think, would have, been more successful at attracting high schoolers to that choral program.
I love that. Ruth, thanks so much for this conversation. I've learned a lot. I've been hearing a lot about the art of gathering from you and from other people, so I'm really excited to get it. And you told me about the art of relevance recently as well, so that's on my list too. How can people learn more about you, learn more about your work? Please plug whatever you'd like, whatever people would benefit from.
I am constantly posting on LinkedIn and Twitter because I'm always in my studies and reading and research. I'm always coming up with gems that I want to share with the world. So you can follow me there. I also have a blog at cultureforhire.com. And I also run what I call the Arts Marketing Hall of Fame, which is it's a Facebook group where every day I post an outstanding example of relevant and customer-centric arts marketing. So I think there's 325 folks on there following that. So we have a lot of fun with that as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One thing I love about the Hall of Fame, and I'm one of those 325 people, is that it's so easy to look. And I did a diversity workshop recently on marketing, and it's so easy to look at something and say that's wrong, and that's not good. And so what I love about what you've been doing is that you're showing what could be good, and you're showing good examples that we can actually learn from, instead of what's easier, which is just saying that's not good and then talking about why. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, absolutely.
So one of the things that always boggled my mind early on was the fact that there's hundreds and hundreds of years worth of music, and we're just adding every year to that repertoire. Yet as conductors, very early on, we're basically told, this is the music that you have to know. This is the music that will sell tickets. This is the music that, as a music director, you have to be familiar with, and everything else, well, you don't have time for it.
Yeah.
But I always love discovering new things and hearing what other people have found and discovered. So what's a hidden gem of sorts musically? It doesn't even have to be a classical, a piece of classical literature. It could be anything music-wise that you think deserves more time in our ears on the concert hall or on our Spotify playlist.
Yeah, well, I was when I was looking at this question earlier, I was thinking classically, so I'll go in that direction. And as a former opera singer, I'm going even more niche. But I have a friend and colleague from my time at Boston University. His name is Omar Najmi, and he's a professional tenor and also a composer. And he's been putting out some really incredible compositions. And most recently, he wrote an opera called This Is Not That Dawn. And the topic of the opera is the 1947 partition of India, which was a apparently really violent time for that country. And the music is incredible. It's incredibly visceral, but it's also very accessible to the 21st century listener. And so it's got that going for it. But then also the topic itself is just a real story. So many opera stories are sort of you have to put your disbelief on hold for a little while. This is a real story of, real human characters. And it invites you to really face this difficult story in our past, and to maybe even have a difficult conversation. And I think that is something that art is really well positioned to do. So I would just love to see this opera get programmed all over the country. I think it's so deserving of that kind of exposure. So This Is Not That Dawn. OmarNajmi.com if you want to check it out. OmarNajmi.com. It's fantastic, and I highly recommend it.
Amazing.
Right.
Thank you. And then our final wrap-up question is our billboard. If you could erect a magic billboard that everybody would see every day, what message would you want to send out to them every day?
Oh, I like that. Well, this was probably too long for a billboard, but we could figure out a way to shorten it. But it's that idea
it's quite a big billboard.
Okay, good. So many of classical music traditions have come from the 19th century European high society, and the world has changed dramatically since then. So to remain relevant in the 21st century, we must be willing to create new traditions that reflect our changing world.
Perfect. And we talked about quite a few options for those today. And again, we'll direct people to your blog, Culture for Hire, where you've written plenty about them there as well.
Yes.
I remembered one of the things, the thing early on that I forgot. I remembered it. We don't have to talk about it, but it just stuck out to me. You were saying that orchestras are trying to create that need instead of see what the community needs. And I was like, that's classic product design. Don't start a business because you, for whatever thing you think is going to be successful, go see what people need and then fill that. I was just
Totally.
it's just so stupid. I don't know. It's been a fun year of exploring all these things that are just seem so obvious once you have that lens to look through. So
Well, it's hard when you get stuck in a rut, you know?
Yeah.
Everyone's doing it a certain way. And I have done, I've had conversations with some organizations that are excited about my ideas, but then they say, but like the Pittsburgh Symphony is like right down the road and they're not doing it this way. And that feels too risky, you know? But at this point, I'm like, what else do you have to lose, you know?
yeah, that would be. I would say don't try to compete with the bigger orchestra. Don't try to compete with those other ones. Set yourself apart.
Totally.
Yeah, we've been talking recently about like who is your audience and who is not your audience, and you know a lot of these basic marketing things that we don't talk about, like do we create a product because we want to, or do we find the need that and then create the product? So
Yes.
it's been an exciting. I would love to have you back on to talk just about marketing, and like the slideshow that you show when you did the live stream with Aubrey a couple of months ago. Like that was again, like I'm like, okay, I'm starting a new season. Here we go. What can I change?
Yes.
So
I love it.
I love all the work you're doing. Thank you so much
Oh, absolutely.
for the work you're doing, and thank you for joining us today.
Oh, totally. Thanks for the invitation. This has been great.